Well, what happens when you research myocarditis and mainstream publications won't publish your research because they just don't want to hear it? That is exactly what happened to our next guest, and he's here to tell us about it. We're going to talk with Rav Arora. He's a 22-year-old independent journalist based in Vancouver and the co-founder of the Illusion of Consensus substack with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, excuse me. I'm so glad that you're here to tell this story. I know a lot of our audience has followed you and Dr. Bhattacharya, and they want to know exactly how this unfolded because of this silence that's been happening and continues to happen around the COVID-19 vaccine. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Natalie, for having me on. Big fan of the show and love what you guys do.
Thank you very much. Now, COVID adverse reactions were something you picked up on pretty quickly and started to report it. Tell us tell us your story about how the mainstream media just wouldn't hear it early on and continues to not hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. So early on during COVID, I was not really paying attention to much of anything. I graduated from high school in 2019. And after that, didn't know what the hell was going to go on with my life. I didn't have a plan, didn't have a clear agenda of what I wanted to do. And then BLM happened, George Floyd happened. And right there, I felt this necessity to do some honest reporting and some opinion writing as well about the kind of toxicity of identity politics and the dangers of depolicing. Those were kind of my issues initially. And I wrote about those issues in very prominent news outlets, and that did really, really well for me for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I was investigating that issue more and more for several months. The racial issue, identity politics, criminal justice. And then so that's most part of 2020, early 2021. And then in the summer of 2021, when vaccine mandates started being pushed here in Canada, I, just as a responsible, honest citizen, decided to look into it for the first time. Just the efficacy and safety surrounding the vaccines and the whole approval process. And the conclusion I came away at the very, very least in August of 2021 was that this was not the right decision for me as a young, healthy male. But I was completely stunned that the Trudeau government was actually actively coercing this on me, and the provincial government as well. So much so that I couldn't technically exercise at a gym, couldn't go to certain
Mm-hmm.
restaurants, couldn't go to large gatherings, weddings, like a bunch of things that I was suddenly barred from. Couldn't even leave my country, and my family members, many of whom were also unvaccinated, couldn't go back to India to visit relatives. Like, we were landlocked for not
Yes.
taking an experimental technology, and that to me was completely unexpected, and I did not see that coming at all. And kind of early on, you had echoes during just the initial wave of lockdowns, people talking about, like, the tyrants are going to take over, the authoritarians are going to start taking over your life, and they're going to come for you. And I was like, oh, come on, like, what are they going to do? Worst case scenario. But
Right.
then, here we are in 2021, vaccines are being
Losing civil
mandated.
liberties because of a vaccine mandate. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm just giving you like a brief snapshot here. So from that point, I guess I start wanting to report on this, wanting to report on just the mandates. And then increasingly, I started hearing about a couple of cases here and there of people who had serious heart inflammation after taking the mRNA COVID vaccine, primarily young males,
Mm-hmm.
as well as, by the way, I should say, this does not get enough coverage, and probably because it's not seemingly as serious or life threatening as myocarditis is. But I also started hearing about, um, you know, most of kind of my young female friends, or friends of friends that I, in my surrounding area, had serious menstrual irregularities after taking the initial
Which has since
first and
been
second.
proven. Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Since it's been proven, I remember tweeting about it at the time, and it was labeled like, even conservatives, liberals, everyone were kind of attacking me as a conspiracy theorist. And I was like, hey, this is happening anecdotally, and there's some initial data suggesting this. So we should be looking into something like this.
Right.
Um,
And so, as an
Sorry.
independent journalist, you were pitching these stories to mainstream outlets, many of which you haven't actually named names, and you were told this is not our angle, which is not how you're taught in journalism school to have a preconceived angle. You just report the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I really wanted to write about the vaccine myocarditis story,
Hmm.
particularly after hearing many of these cases. And one story in particular it's on my Substack now, Illusion of Consensus, a 38-year-old law enforcement member who was forced to take the vaccine because of the federal vaccine mandates, almost died after taking his second Pfizer shot. His girlfriend actually kind of saved him because he thought he was going to be fine when he was experiencing horrible heart palpitations, and he thought it was like a virus or something that he ate. But thankfully, his girlfriend called the ambulance. Ambulance came, rushed him to the hospital, and the cardiologist said, "You're one of the lucky ones that you've survived this much of a serious adverse reaction to the vaccine." And several months later, still hasn't gone back to work, and many of his life plans were destroyed. And so that story I wanted to report and write about in many prominent mainstream and alternative media outlets, ranging from libertarian, liberal, conservative, kind of all over the place, which is kind of the same places and some other places that I was already publishing for. And again, I'm not going to name names for a number of reasons, but the immediate response that I got time and time again was, "We are a pro-vaccine publication. We
Hmm.
are not going to publish this. This may promote vaccine hesitancy. Our newspaper, our publication has
Hmm.
been promoting vaccination, and this goes against that." Even some editors
Right.
saying, "Well, what's the point of this? Like, why are you writing about vaccines, man? Come on! I mean, this is approved by FDA, CDC. Like all these medical professionals are promoting this. I just wish that everyone would just get vaccinated already, and
Right.
we should not be making this into a big issue." And I'm just like, wow, like I was initially writing about so many controversial topics on policing and race, and was allowed to take kind of the contrarian position on those very radioactive issues. But here, there was a very clear agenda, in many cases, a top down directive, like,
Yeah.
maybe potentially some editors being like potentially interested, but them explicitly saying, "We are a pro vaccine publication and we're not going to run any kind of dissent on this topic."
Well, that in and of itself is quite incriminating for any media outlet, right? And so I don't want to definitively say Redacted is anti vaccine or Redacted is pro vaccine. Redacted is only going to investigate any and all vaccines and FDA approvals and reports of adverse events and also successes. That's what you do as a media outlet. It's not up to me to want anything at all other than the truth. And so the idea that someone would literally say this media outlet is pro vaccine is in itself a media bias and a violation of the ethics of journalism.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, the topic I was trying to cover, I feel like it's still not being properly covered. Like the whole vaccine adverse events broadly, but specifically the cardiac risks associated with the vaccine. There's more and more studies continually coming out that are not being covered in mainstream media. There was a recent 1 year follow up of patients from Hong Kong who got vaccine myocarditis, and one
Hmm.
year later, more than 50% of them still had evidence of scarring
Hmm.
after taking the vaccine. Italian researchers now are reporting on a couple of cases of relapsed myocarditis, right?
Mm.
Patients who had myocarditis supposedly recovered, and then after got it again somehow, then still having some kind of cardiac complications. I mean, the evidence is pretty incontrovertible to me at this point, especially when you look at the national trends, which I was tracking very, very early on, like countries like Sweden, France, Israel, Germany, as well as a couple of U.S. hospitals that were closely tracking myocarditis rates. Right in 2019, 2020, the rates were basically the same, but in 2021 there was a sharp uptick. And people want to say, well, maybe it was COVID, maybe it was something else, maybe it was climate change, or supplements or
Sure.
whatever. But it's
Yes.
like it's very, very clear to anyone who's paying attention and being honest about what we've actually done, and about actually now admitting to many of the errors that we committed, including medical professionals and people at the CDC and the FDA that recklessly and prematurely pushed the COVID vaccines despite not having adequate safety and efficacy data.
So then you decided to take your story to Substack, and create your own sort of mini media world so that you could get the word out there, because you have you continue to have, right? No mainstream publications that even want to follow the story now when it turns out you were right.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple things that I've done. I mean, there was one piece in the New York Post, I believe a year ago, that I did write about broadly kind of my experience with the COVID mandates, a very kind of personal story. And there's been a few things in the Epic Times, which has been, really good to me.
Hmm.
But otherwise, I mean, if you look, there was a Freedom of Information revelation about a year ago, which showed that HHS has paid, basically every mainstream media outlet, all the prominent newspapers and publications, certain amount of money to promote COVID vaccines and support the kind of
Yes.
mainstream health agenda. So, there's that clear financial interest that's obviously playing a big role in this. But there's also this kind of illusion of consensus, which is the title of my Substack with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, where you just have certain doctors and epidemiologists and immunologists favored in the mainstream media, right? Dr. Eric Topol, Nicholas Christakis, Peter Hotez, right? These are
Yes.
kind of viewed as the gurus of of the COVID science. But then other experts like Dr. J, Dr. Martin Koldorf, Dr. Marty McCary, Dr. Vinay Prasad, many of these guys are not favored in the New York Times or CNN. These are not
Yes.
seen as the experts. So when people think of, well, expert, well, Peter Hotez and Nick Christakis, well, they say you should get your third booster shot. Like I've had a bunch of back and forths with Dr. Peter Hotez on Twitter, and I've
Oh
continually
yes,
just
we're
asked
on
him.
that guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I've
Dan
I've
Cohen
I've
was
continued.
warning about this guy for many months now. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I've asked him a few times on Twitter, like, so what's the benefit for someone like me to get vaccinated or to get a bivalent booster? I think I asked him a few months ago, and he was like, the risk of long COVID, the serious risk of hospitalization in your age, and I'm
Uh
like,
huh.
what are you talking about, man? Like,
That data
this should
doesn't
not be
bear
rocket
out.
science.
No, the
Yeah,
data
there
of
is no
someone
data
like
supporting
you,
that.
22-year-old healthy guy, risk of hospitalizations, that data doesn't bear out any longer. So that's a lie. Yeah. Now, you also have been targeted by Mark Cuban for just questions like this. Just, why should a healthy person like me continue to trust or consider these vaccinations when? Why do you think, why does he care to spar with someone like you?
Yeah, well, there's kind of a long backstory to this that I don't know how much I can reveal, how much is private, but it involved Joe Rogan about a year ago, and there was some private exchanges between me and Mark was viciously attacking Joe for talking about vaccine myocarditis, which credit to Joe for being one of the few people with as much power as he has in the media ecosystem and actually talking about the issue. And in that private exchange a year ago, he was not taking the issue seriously when I was giving him, piece of evidence after piece of evidence. But now Joe mentioned the fact that he and I had this exchange and it exposed Mark and his complete ignorance on the topic. And I posted that clip and it seems to have triggered Mark
Oh,
that Joe called him out publicly on it. And he and I are having this back and forth now where he completely bought the information from or the misinformation from the FDA and the CDC. And he's asking questions like, well, why didn't, sports organizations, teams, universities, different groups and organizations demand players not get vaccinated or discourage them from getting vaccinated? Like, why did that not happen? Or why is that not happening right now? Like, why are you the only one who's talking about this? And first of all, I'm like, again, I'm not the only one talking about this. Because he said, I'm very skeptical when one person is saying one thing and, a handful of other doctors to support them when the whole
right.
the overwhelming consensus is actually X.
Yeah.
Everyone should be getting vaccines safe and effective for COVID. But I was pointing out to him over and over again, sports teams, universities that many of which continue to mandate booster shots, they relied on the CDC and the FDA. I mean, it's kind of a complex problem with many
Mm.
layers, but and it's very interesting on one level, but just tragic and frustrating on another level to see how institutions operate. But we as a society, we rely on different people for information, right? We rely on our dentists, we rely on software engineers to help us with different issues, and unfortunately, many organizations and institutions relied on FDA and CDC for accurate, reliable, safe information about the recommending COVID vaccines for
Yes.
young people. But even within those organizations, as I was pointing out to Mark, like you had two senior FDA officials resign in late 2021 due to the agency's reckless and zealous pursuit of, vaccinating every young, healthy individual with a booster shot. People within their own agency have left, and there's various whistleblowers within the agency, anonymous FDA officials who say like this data is absolute garbage, and this is not safe and effective the way that it's being branded as.
Hmm.
So I get why people are confused and kind of mystified, like, well, what all these places are relying on FDA and CDC. And to be honest, if I didn't do any of this reporting, if I was looking at this fresh, just in the way that I trust my dentist or trust certain people with authority on various issues, I would also be quite stunned that the FDA and the CDC, institutions that are supposed to provide accurate and reliable information, have so miserably and painfully failed over the course of the pandemic. I mean, it's really changed my view of human nature and of institutions to see this level of corruption, incompetence, and manipulation. I would say I've become more cynical about institutions and
Yeah.
about corruption over the past couple of years, writing about this issue.
Well, it's a great story of conviction bias. And a lot of times, even people like that, like Mark Cuban, it becomes a war of press releases because he can point to the FDA saying, we approved this and we think it's safe because we wrote it down on a press release. And then the hyperlinks that they give you for clinical trials are not at all impressive clinical trials. That's something that I keep myself busy with. Every time the FDA says it approves a new drug, I go ahead and read those studies. And I'm like, is that an awesome clinical trial? And so it just becomes a war of press releases. And if I can link you to something that the FDA published, then I think that's it. And I'm right. I don't have to click the hyperlinks and analyze it for myself. That's what keeps journalists like you and me in business, I guess, because we're willing to just do the homework, right? It's a
Yeah,
crazy world. Who would have thought that truth is an untapped market? And
absolutely.
so why? So what is it that we can find if we follow your Substack and follow you on Twitter? You are continuing to report just on myocarditis or more than that?
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's been the prominent issue over the past year and a half, I would say. But I'm broadly going into big pharma now, doing more and more reporting on multiple different issues. Particularly, I'm very very interested in mental health and the growing medicalization of mental health issues, and the profit motives and the pharmaceutical
Yeah.
corruption surrounding that, the growing ADHD crisis and the push for putting your kids on stimulants, some of the increasingly it's becoming more and more clear unreliable data surrounding antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications. Like there's a lot of corruption and a lot of manipulation and misleading data of and mentally I find so interesting because someone being depressed versus someone being joyful versus someone being in
Right.
between. I mean, it's a radical change in your life, and the fact that there are things that are governing and uh, things that are affecting the way that we operate mentally in the world, and therefore have different kinds of relationships and interact with people in a different way. The way that certain medications and pharmaceutical drugs are approved and regulated and promoted on the basis of very weak data, often with certain adverse events, is quite interesting. And I'm going to be doing more and more reporting on that, as well as there's some stuff on Ozempic, the miracle weight loss drug, which also has a lot of adverse events associated with it. That's kind of going to be some of my direction moving forward, is with big pharma, as well as censorship, covering the Missouri versus Biden case, which Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, he's also co-author on the Substack. He's been a big part of that, and fortunately, the federal judge ruled in the favor of him and the various plaintiffs in ruling that the federal government did coerce social media companies to censor posts about COVID that deviated from the narrative censoring, various posts on natural immunity, vaccine side effects, and efficacy. I mean, there's really, there's a lot for conspiracy theorists to mull over and to speculate about, unfortunately, and that's giving rise to certain fringe ideas as well, because certain people are going to be prone to that. But at the very least, there is very controlled, coordinated efforts to censor information, to promote a certain kind of agenda, to inject you with certain kind of vaccines and put you on certain kinds of drugs to regulate your neurochemistry and therefore affect your life. That, to be honest, is quite ominous. And I really hope that more and more people listen to your show and subscribe to our Substack and read the kind of work we're doing, because if we're not aware and we're not mindful and we just rely on mainstream doctors, psychiatrists, the FDA and the CDC, then we're going to be further and further removed kind of from our true nature, to put it in kind of spiritual terms, and away from kind of who we really are, and further down this pharmaceutical political lane where we're not really getting to the root cause of what's causing obesity, what's causing people to get serious reactions to a virus or mental health issues and whatnot.
Right. Did you know that the first doctors paid and reimbursed by insurance companies were psychiatrists, were people who were like prescribing things for what we call mental health. It's kind of even that term is loaded, because we imply that the brain can be diseased. I mean, it can have disease, but mental health is not a brain disease. And so that continues to be pharmacratized because of this profit-driven system where you can't actually prove it through, you just say that person is exhibiting these types of. So yes, this is something I've been interested in a lot lately too. I've been reading the book Pharmacracy. Have you heard of it?
No.
It's an old book, but it's really interesting about how like we need to continue to call things diseases if there's profit there, and we can call certain things mental health issues but we just decide which ones are which based on whether or not there's a medicine for it. Like, what do you call it when you like to light things on fire? When you're a pyromaniac? Pyromaniac, right? Like that is a mental health disease, but we have no we have no medicine for it, so we don't feel the need to like put it in court cases or give it an official diagnosis or create medicine around it. But if we do, then that might actually, we use it as like basis to get people off of crimes, that they have this whatever mental health disorder, right? And so there is absolutely profit and reasons in order to continue to promote mental health disorder, even though that may not serve us as a society. So yes, I'm with you on that. So thank you so much for telling us your story. You can follow him on Rav Arora 1 on X or Twitter, and his Substack, The Illusion of Consensus Substack. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.